to see you all the way from Dubai. Fantastic. Very interesting to get, if you've got any perspective, because I know Dubai is in a very different situation at the moment to the UK. So welcome this morning. So we're going to make a start. So I've started recording. So welcome everybody to our session this morning, the first for 2021. So we had a very successful round of forums during 2020, looking at all sorts of different topics, which I think a lot of which are still very, very relevant. We looked at kind of remote recruitment, which I suspect a lot of people are now going to be facing in the current months. So do look back at our resources and our the recordings of sessions, and we put together a lot of collateral that people can use for looking at remote recruitment. We looked at remote onboarding. We looked at keeping work ethic and culture amongst teams who are working remotely or hybrid working. So this is the first session for 2021, and it just was born out of conversations that I've had across various levels, both with employers, with clients, with some of the speakers you're going to be hearing from today. I've tried to gather a very wide range of inputs, but as I said, often the secret sauce is in what the audience bring to it as well. So please, 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 as we're progressing through the next hour or so, use the chat box to let us know your own thoughts. Just a reminder, if everyone can stay on mute, getting a little bit of feedback from somebody at the moment. So if we can just stay on mute unless you're actually going to be contributing. But I do think, I mean, we saw actually a very strong recruitment period during last autumn. Surprisingly, I mean, if we go back to last summer, I was anticipating that the recruitment and the intake for the back end of 2020, I thought was going to be a bit of a car crash given the situation. But actually, accountancy particularly seems to have been a very, very resilient sector. We saw as big an autumn intake in 2020 as we did in 2019, which I just thought was, very reassuring about perhaps the robustness of our sector. I guess whether things are good or bad, people need accountants. So we have generally seen, and I'm sure this is reflected on the call, people have been busy, crazy busy over the last few months and are staying busy, and so do definitely need the resource coming in. So we saw very good intake in autumn. We saw an incredible intake actually in January. We don't normally tend to have a huge intake in January, but we had almost as many students coming in January as we did in the autumn, which was unbelievable. And actually, I was being shown through our March intake figures yesterday, and we don't normally have a March intake. But actually, we've got, I think, nearly 100 new learners just coming into the Cambridge Centre, for instance, in March. So, it seems that, recruitment is still going on, which is fantastic. Training and development is still going on, which is fantastic. Apprenticeships continue to grow, possibly driven a bit by the Chancellor's apprenticeship incentives that are still available till the end of March for bringing in and training new apprentices. But I think it's clear, and I've heard this in terms of new entry-level candidates who've already arrived in the workplace, but also around the recruitment processes that's now going on, that there are differences in things like, the social skills amongst young adults at the moment. Understandably, I look at my own daughters. My eldest daughter's been pretty much camped in her bedroom for 10 months doing all of her education. That's just a different experience to what they would normally have in their classrooms, playing sports, just mingling with young adults, mingling with their teachers and the like. So I think social skills are going to have been affected. I think self-awareness, and I think broadly just confidence. Just quite an upsetting story. A client of mine was telling me last week actually that their own nephew was interested in moving into finance and had just been looking for some work experience posts and had been having absolutely no success whatsoever. And I think it's just because of the practicalities and the logistics. Employers are just not in a situation to be able to offer or feel that they can offer work experience placements. But this, poor young lad hadn't been getting any joy. And the way they'd taken it, and the phrase I was told was that they were just saying, no one wants me. No one wants me. Which I don't think is the case, but you can imagine for a young adult just coming into a potential career, that's such a powerful thing to affect them and could, I think, affect them for many years to come. So this is why I thought this discussion would be useful. So I've tried to gather a range of speakers who can give us insight into different elements of it. But I think actually, without further ado, I'm going to ask Anne Bailey from Form the Future, who I think will be able to give us some really interesting insights. So perhaps, Anne, if you maybe just introduce yourself and just tell us briefly about what you do and what Form the Future do, and then I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on how this pandemic has been affecting these young adults and will do for the coming months.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Gareth. Yeah, it's great to be here. It's great to come to your gatherings, and I really appreciate the fact that you want to shine a light on this topic. Form the Future is something I set up about 5 years ago, and our purpose is to help young people prepare for their future career. And we do this by working closely with schools, but actively involving employers in the process. I hold on to that principle: you can't be what you can't see. So introducing young people to people from industry, doing a wide range of careers at a time when they're having to make choices about what courses to study, what route to go through, or setting out the sort of career aspirations for themselves is so important. And so just if we reflect on what this last year has been like, my goodness, it has been a challenge. It's been a challenge for so many, and not least for an organization like ours, which is trying to give young people hope and direction about their future. Should I just kick off by reflecting on some of those sort of questions you've set? The sort of
please do, Anne. Please do.
Yeah. Okay. So really, you asked me to sort of consider, what have school and college leavers, or those rising school and college leavers, missed out on in the last 11 months, and really how is this going to affect them and affect all of us as we think about bringing these people into our workplaces. So you referenced a little bit earlier, it's almost like the war and the evacuations, and that scale of sort of disruption. I think it's not an exaggeration. I actually would say their lives have been turned upside down. If you think about young people going through our education system, they've all been focused on this idea of the terminal exam. The tests, the exams, the series of scores that are going to sort of mark out be a reflection of their past, but set them up for their future. And when the decision last year came very quickly, I have to say, to cancel exams without any plan for what would replace them, those year 13s, year 11s, year 13s who are facing GCSEs or A levels, that really did sort of, went whoosh. What happened? Now, some were thrilled. I know one or two who actually thought, this is good news. But for a lot of them, it caused huge amounts of stress and anxiety and uncertainty. How will I be assessed? What will I have to show for myself? And, the year 12s who were watching that last year and who are now going through the same thing, it's just created a huge amount of anxiety. And now I'm not a big fan of exams. I don't think that 1 mark on one day in June is a proper assessment of your full ability. And I'd really much rather see sort of, a whole series of data points. What is this telling me about their motivation, and are they growing and maturing and developing and all those sorts of things, let alone all the other qualities and aspects that make someone an interesting person. When I hire people, I'm really not that interested in their grades. I'm interested in all those other aspects of who they are. Are they curious about things? Are they friendly? Are they hardworking? Do they turn up on time? Do they commit when they say they're going to do stuff? Those are the sort of qualities that, as employers, we really are looking for. So again, we reflect, what has this last 11 months done for that? Well, again, big, serious damage. They haven't had those opportunities to take part in the sorts of clubs or activities they might do in school, to be able to sort of have reference points for saying, I can demonstrate my team working qualities because I've been part of the basketball team, or, I organized these activities at my school, or I was part of a production, and, my role as stage manager meant that I had to do X, Y, and Z. Those things are so vital for young people to be able to describe and evidence those transferable skills and those skills that we know employers need. And I would also add the point you were making earlier about part-time jobs. I mean, I'm American, as you can probably all hear. We go out to work when we're about 13. There's none of this sort of, you got to be 16 to have a job. You get out there as soon as you can to start earning some money. And in the process, learning about the world, developing those skills, there's important skills like customer service. And I think about my own daughter's experience. So she was a very shy child. She was very petite. She was very lacking in confidence. And when she was 15 or 16, she thought, I really want a job. And she got a job at H&M in the Grafton Center. And that job was the making of her, having to sort of do the old, I'm sorry you had to wait, because if anyone who remembers the Grafton Center in the good old days, there was always a long queue, managing the changing room, working with colleagues, crowded, busy, dynamic environment. For someone like her, she just grew in confidence. And it was that confidence that allowed her to subsequently take on a volunteering opportunity at the hospital. Julia, I think you're on the call, and subsequently apply and do a degree in nursing. And now she works as a nurse at Papworth Hospital. So, that's why those part-time jobs have been so important. And if we look back over the last 11 months, many young people have missed out on that. There's also things like, and then, where we come into my work, there's been some reflection in the chat. People are saying, we haven't had the chance to go into schools. We haven't been able to do those mock interviews, let alone the work experience. So you're right. We have struggled. If I just reflect on our own statistics as an organization, in a typical year, we are working with near on 20,000 students a year. Last year, we pulled our figures at the end of the school year and we'd seen 13,000, pretty high because we'd had the first, half of the year to get through. We were on track to see over 20,000. We saw 13. This year, I'm afraid to say we've only managed to see fewer than 5,000 so far. Now, it's still a substantial amount of young people, but we would expect to be at least double there by now. And the reason is, schools have had to focus on the core education. The core curriculum has squeezed out time for the sorts of career activities that we would normally do, the What's My Lines, the careers carousels, the project days in companies that we do through our Cambridge Launchpad project. All of that has had to be paused. And while we've been trying to find virtual and digital substitutions for that, it has been hard. I will put some details in the chat though, because we do have some things coming up that I would love people to get involved in. We really found a workaround, and we just have to keep going because it's too important for young people to miss out on this exposure to careers, the opportunity to have a go, to learn what they're capable of. So if we think about, what are employers going to be seeing as a result of this, it is that lack of confidence. I think the mental health issues are very prominent right now. I think we understand that many have suffered badly. The anxiety that comes with that. There's also learning loss. There are, certainly I know schools have been working really hard, and I know they've really, made significant strides this year to sort of recover some of that. But nonetheless, there will be things like lab technique that hasn't been able to be developed, or using tools, or perhaps various software programs they can only use at school. And these sort of things are going to become apparent when they enter the workplace. We've talked about work experience. Last year, we canceled 3,000 work experience opportunities for students. I mean, we didn't cancel it, they just couldn't take place. So we're working hard at trying to find virtual arrangements. And again, if anyone wants to talk to me more about how they can help with that, we would love to hear from them. But I guess the other thing to say, though, is on the upside, like us, they've all had to learn how to use Zoom and Teams, and how to share documents online, how to collaborate online. So they will come with greater communication skills than they may have otherwise had. as we think about what can employers do in their recruitment process, but also in terms of onboarding, I do have a few ideas about this. And I've been giving this some thought because, you know, they are at a disadvantage right now, and yet we need them to succeed. And so really the question has to be, what do we need to do? One of my biggest concerns is that students this lack of opportunities hasn't allowed them to get to know themselves. I always start with self-awareness as being the starting point for any journey you're going to go on, whether it's in your career or in your life or anything. Self-awareness is so important, and you need to have those sort of opportunities to have a go, develop strengths and skills, and then the sort of the language to name those. And, you know, it's when you've got that, when you know that you are, you know, a creative collaborator, it's so much easier to navigate the interview process, isn't it? The applications, to do a really compelling application for a job, matching your skills to others. These are people who won't necessarily have this. So I'm asking and suggesting that employers really need to provide a bit more scaffolding in their recruitment process. You know, you might need to say, give me an example of when you've been able to do this. You may need to draw back from when you were younger. You know, if they haven't been able to do these activities, these clubs and things and part-time jobs in the last couple of years, maybe it was back in year 9. What did they do? Give them permission to reach back. Model and give them an example of what you're talking about when you're talking about transferable skills. I know it feels a bit of dumbing down, but I call it scaffolding instead. You know, give them that support to be able to do the best they can. I always tell young people that the interview isn't trying to catch you out. It's actually trying to give you a chance to show what you're capable of. I'm just asking employers to sort of make that a little bit easier. And then the other thing is, you know, anyone involved in recruitment knows that interviews you know, interviews favor the extrovert. They favor people who have well-developed communication skills. You know, potentially they favor people from a particular walk of life or family background. And they can be very discriminating for that reason. Discriminatory, I'm not sure. So the other thing I really like is giving them tasks that test their natural skills and ability. Or job trials, you know, being really upfront about, you know, we're going to take you on for a month. We're going to pay you because we want to, because we're that kind of employer. But we're going to both get a chance to see over the next few weeks, you know, whether this is the right opportunity for you. And maybe that's the best way to really see what they're capable of, rather than, you know, because their portfolio is a bit empty. The other thing I think that's going to be really important, and I think this is, I'm coming towards the end, so I'm not dominating this too much, but actually I have 2 things. One is I really want you to find mentors in your business. So people in the business who can really look after those those new arrivals, show them the ropes, help be a place they can go to ask questions. You know, if they haven't been on work experience before, this could be their first time in a workplace. Knowing when you're allowed to go on Facebook, knowing what to do when you've finished a task, these sort of really basic entry-level work skills may not be there. And be upfront about it and say, you know, you probably don't know how to do this. We really recommend using other young employees for this, people who are relatable, probably know what it's like to be starting out. And those other young employees will gain a lot from developing as mentors. So it's something that we're really eager to work with companies on, to develop their own mentors, their own in-house young mentors for early careers. So again, talk to me if you want to know more about that. And then finally, I'm just going to go back to this point about education outreach. It has been less, as I've indicated from a moment, but it hasn't gone away. And we all need to keep going for it, taking any opportunity we can. So we're exploring virtual work experience programs for this summer. We've got a big virtual careers fair for 6th formers at the end of March called Opportunities Ahead Live. Really want people to come along to that. And we're also running a series of sort of inside events, of twilight evening events where young people and their parents can drop in and just learn more. So we've just got to keep banging the drum, doing what we can to give them a chance it's too, the risk is too great that if we ignore them, if we leave them now, we could have a lost generation who never find their way in, who never get the opportunities, and who suffer for many years to come. And I don't think any of us want to see that happen.
Fantastic, Anne, thank you. And actually, it makes me think back, 10, 11, 12 years ago, the aftermath of the big financial crash. And back then it was the young adults that I think disproportionately suffered the impact of the crash, and that actually lasted for some of them possibly even to today, in terms of the longer term career scarring that they suffered. And I think it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that doesn't happen again, and that it's not the young adults that take the brunt of this, because and there is a selfishness in there, because we all know it will cost us in the long run, through our own recruitment, our own succession, our own progression. I still see firms now who are struggling to recruit into partnership level, and I think a lot of it can be traced back to the recruitment decisions made 12 years ago, which is actually heartening that employers still are recruiting. I've heard a lot of people reference the 2008-9 crisis, saying that they don't want to make those same mistakes again, and they do want to make sure they're still bringing in that entry-level talent, which is really reassuring. And so fantastic, Anne, thank you. Some really great advice there, and some really great insight. As ever, if anyone's got any contributions, any thoughts on anything that's cropping up, please be chucking it into the chat box. And Anne, please do put any resources you think will be useful into the chat box yourself there. But you made a mention there around schools, have had to focus on the curriculum, absolutely. They have ultimately got a job to do getting, their learners, and I see it with my two daughters, and I'm sure a lot of us are in the similar position where, it's become a challenge just to get through the basics, I think, in terms of a curriculum, and perhaps I think you used the phrase it's squeezing out time for other activities. So actually, I think that's a nice lead into our second speaker, Steve. So can I ask Steve to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your role, and then again, just as Anna's done, just give us your thoughts on the impact that this may have had on young adults.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for asking me to come along and talk to this forum. Actually, I can see Andy Goodwin is there from Long Road, who sent me the invitation, and he didn't mention actually at the time that it was going to be in the middle of half-term week, but I won't hold that against him. And as I said to my son the other day, because I've got two school-age kids, my son is in year 13, so would be preparing for A-levels, and my daughter is in year 10. And I had to remind them that it was half-term week, and say, what's really different? And they said, well, yeah, not a whole lot really. So if they do, it's, what's the time now? 9:06. So they probably won't be getting up just yet. But if they do walk past me, you'll know that it is half-term, and they're not meant to be in lessons. So just a little bit about me. I'm vice principal at Long Road Sixth Form College, which is in Cambridge. It's on the edge of the biomedical campus. In fact, it's becoming more and more in the middle of the biomedical campus as that grows. And it's about 2,500 students, mostly level 3 students doing A-levels and applied general qualifications, BTECs, Cambridge Nationals, and about 10% GCSE, sort of level 2, doing retakes or trying to get into level 3 study. So what I thought I could talk to you a little bit about was from the educational perspective, and say what's been going on. I can only talk really about that age group, post-16 age group. My wife's a primary school teacher, and we have had discussions about the impacts on younger children. And I think this is something that is going to ripple through education for a number of years. And the research seems to suggest that actually the younger children have probably had the bigger impact of loss of learning. Kids in the very early years who should be making very fast progress with reading and writing, not seeing that, particularly those disadvantaged students. Probably at the age group I teach, the impact is probably the least, to be honest. They've had 12 years in education already. This has been very disrupted, but in terms of them, if you like, being institutionalized, they know what education is about. They know how to work. It's been very different, but they're very adaptable and they're very resilient. And some, I'm going to be honest, some have flourished. Some have really done brilliantly working from home and have said that they're getting more done. In fact, a survey, we do lots of surveys, vibe checks of the students, how they're getting on. And some students have said they've been working better because one of the reasons is that the teacher hasn't been blathering on in class as much, and they're able just to get on with things. And they also haven't had to spend as much time on public transport. So some of our students spend 2 hours each way getting to the college and back, and they've been able to spend that extra 4 hours on study. So for some of them, it's actually worked quite well. For others, it has been very detrimental. I'm not going to make light of that, and they've developed severe sort of mental health issues. But one of the messages I would give is that one of the things we're trying to do is to not tell them that this is terrible and their lives are ruined, because they're absolutely not. And so we don't want to catastrophize the situation. We also don't know what the long-term impacts are. I teach an EPQ, which, if any of you know, extended project qualification. It's a very good qualification. It involves students doing their own research and writing or creating something that they are interested in. I'm supervising a student who's doing his EPQ on football and the impact of coronavirus on football. And he wanted to do this because he couldn't play football anymore and was really missing it and wanted to do a project on football. And we've had a number of discussions about it. And one of the things that we decided was it's impossible really to do a piece of research on the impact when you're still in the middle of this thing. We're still in the middle of this thing. We don't know what the long-term effects are going to be. We don't know how those ripples are going to play out. We don't know what those students coming through, whether they're going to be better learners now or worse learners. So it's very early days. What I can tell you, and what I'm going to tell you a little bit about, is what happened last year with the cancellation of exams, and what that might mean for grading this year, and what those grades might mean, and whether you should look at something different. If you've looked at the grading consultation, one of the first questions was, what should grades represent? And that's a really big question. As Anna's already said, students have been working towards a set of grades on a piece of paper that is usually the ticket to getting an interview at least. And those grades don't necessarily mean the same thing as they used to. They used to represent what students did on a certain number of days in the summer term at the end of a course of learning. And they don't quite mean the same thing anymore. So what's it been like for students since March 20th, 2020? Well, that first lockdown was very much a bit of a novelty, and we didn't think it was going to last very long. Teachers we sent the kids home. We didn't have very much notice. We had about 3 or 4 days notice, if you recall, to say, right, everyone's finishing. And I've been in teaching 30 years, and education is a very consistent profession. It runs along the same timescales every year. You start off in September, you have half term, you have Christmas, and you have a party, and then you go through and you prepare students for exams at the end. And there's some courses that do continual assessment, etc. This was the first time, in 30 years that had been disrupted for me. And to begin with, I'm going to have to admit, it was nice. I quite liked it. I was sort of at home, and teachers were at home, and they were sending work home by email, and students were sending work back by email, and we thought it was all going to be over by Easter. Post-Easter, we started to realise what those implications were really going to be, and that we might not come back before the end of that academic year, and exams were cancelled. We had to start developing virtual learning, virtual classrooms through Microsoft Teams. So we had to learn how to do an induction session, literally teach every teacher a new way of teaching immediately. Okay, that should not be understated. This is a profession which had done the same thing for years and years and years, and students had been expecting that for years and years, and we completely shifted our method of delivery. We also were now being told to assess the students' ability because they weren't going to have exams. So our previous way of working was to help students beat the exam system. That's what we do. We prepare them for exams, and all of the assessments that we do during the time are really to help students understand their strengths and weaknesses so that we can correct them and move on and beat the exam at the end of the process. We were now told you are now assessing your own students. And that's a very, very different relationship between student and teacher, and it turns on its head the work that they do. Because previously we'd be saying it's okay to fail, it's okay to not do great, because what you're doing is you're learning. For this year in particular, that's got a different perspective on it. Now it's, you've got a grade for this grade might be used to judge you at some point in the future. Now last year that wasn't quite the same. We were told when exams finished not to take too much notice of the lockdown period of learning. Most of the learning had been completed by sort of Easter time last year. We would expect the courses to pretty much have finished teaching and they'd be working on revision. So we were largely looking back at the work that they've done and how what their abilities were. We weren't worried too much about the loss of learning. So in fact, for applied general subjects, those BTECs and Cambridge Technicals, we had a huge amount of banked assessed work already. The students by that stage knew what grades they were likely to get. For A-level students, it was a little bit different. We were told to say what we thought they would get had the exams taken place and they were able to sit them, which is a bit of a bizarre thing to try to do. Lots of students assume that meant that they would get their predicted grade. That wasn't the case, and it caused an awful lot of problems, because I'm going to talk a little bit about grades now and use some acronyms that you've come across and try to explain them. So we were told to give the students a centre assessed grade, a CAG. You might be familiar with it, a centre assessed grade. That grade would be sent to the exam boards, and the exam boards would turn it into what did they call it at the time? A calculated grade. Okay, and what the students would end up with in August at the normal time would be a calculated grade based on the CAG, the centre assessed grade that schools and colleges had given them, but moderated according to, and I'm going to say the word, an algorithm. Okay, an algorithm. Now what that meant was we sent forward grades for our students, and then the exam boards applied, it wasn't really an algorithm, it was more of a formula. They applied a formula that was meant to adjust to make those grades look like previous year's grades. So all of our subject teachers were told, put forward not only a grade for each student, but actually you've got to rank all of your students from best student down to worst student. In a class of 15, that's not too bad doing A-level. For a subject like A-level psychology with 200 students, to tell that team to rank them from the best psychology student down to the worst psychology student was quite a difficult job, and one they spent a lot of time going over. What happened then with the grades was that we looked at them as a college, and we were told that this formula, this algorithm, was going to adjust those grades according to our 3-year average results. In other words, it would make our results look like they would be expected to do in any normal year based on a 3-year average of results. So some schools and colleges took that very, very seriously and submitted CAGs that looked very much like their 3-year average. They didn't want the formula to change the grades very much. So they effectively moderated themselves and put quotas on the number of A's, B's, C's, etc. that could be put forward. But we didn't do that at Long Road, and there was a whole, the guidance that came out was very vague, which has caused a lot of problems and will probably cause them this year as well. We checked for consistency across all of our grades and made sure that we weren't being discriminatory. We checked very carefully that different groups of students weren't being subjected to unconscious bias. For example, males, females, different ethnicities, etc. And we used a lot of data crunching to look at what our expected outcomes might be. And we went back to some courses and said, it looks like, you know, we're looking at the pattern of the grades you're putting forward. it looks like you're favouring girls a bit more than boys. Can you give us justification for that? Show us the basis for your thinking over the assessments that you've done, etc., etc. So we did a very strong checking process, but we didn't limit the grades that teachers put in, because the algorithm was going to do that. When we put our grades in, we knew that they were slightly higher than we might be expected to achieve in a normal year. In particular, we were not putting through very many students as fail grades, as U grades at A level. And it begs the question, does that mean that the grades were vastly inflated? I would argue no. And the reason being, grades are a very, very odd thing, really, aren't they? There's one mark between one grade and another grade. Yeah. There's if you're a student that's been working on the sort of B, C stroke boundary, there's a marked difference between those two grades. If you're a teacher making a decision on 100, 200 students in a cohort, and you've got a group of students who are in that sort of B stroke C grade boundary area, which ones do you decide would have a bad day in the exam, and which ones do you decide would have a good day in the exam? Because that's what you're being asked to do. And that's the difference between one grade and another. So teachers tended to put those students through and give them the higher of those two split grades. And where you've got the students at the bottom of that end, the E stroke U students, very few students were put through at U grades. Those were students who probably hadn't turned up to college very much, had not done very much work, and it was pretty nailed on that they weren't of A-level standard. The other students, teachers were very reluctant to say, you know, you're marginal, you're not great, it could go either way, but I don't want to say at this point that you're going to have a bad day in the exam and that you're going to fail. So our grades were higher than they might normally have been expected. However, when the algorithm was applied and the results came through, we expected a little bit of adjustment, but it was clear that they'd adjusted them massively. Some students had gone down 2 grades, 3 grades. And what the algorithm, or formula more correctly, did was that it took that rank order, it ignored the grades that have been awarded by teachers, it took the rank order and decided where to place those grade boundaries based on that 3-year average of results. In fact, it did worse than that, because they decided that small centres were not statistically feasible. Student classes, groups with less than, I think it was 12 students in, a lot of private schools, a lot of small school sixth forms. It ignored all of those students and didn't apply any formula to those students at all. Those students immediately got the grades their teachers had given them, and they tended to be quite high grades. That brought down the average for large centres like sixth form colleges. So our results suddenly went from looking like better than normal year to far worse than normal year. So the algorithm made our results much, much worse. This was replicated around the country. As you know, then the algorithm was abandoned, and we went back to the CAGs, to the centre assessed grades. Okay.
Hey, Steve,
yeah.
Steve, so I'm going to have to break in because we need to get onto our employer panel discussion.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm sure some people will be, because you've got a really unique insight, I guess, into this whole area of what the grades will be. So, you know, feel free if you've got further comments, maybe to drop them into the chat box.
Can I just finish on what that means for this year?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I realised I was going into sort of the detail there. What it means for this year, however, is significantly different. CAGs don't exist this year. This year, it's going to be tags. Gavin Williamson said that there would be no exams, but there was no alternative plan put in place. He said, I'm going to trust the teachers this time. What he meant was, I'm going to put all of the burden onto the teachers now because I don't have a plan B. Okay. So the algorithm is not there. There is no moderation. And students are very, very nervous now about what all the work that they've been doing and the learning that they've been doing means, because it now means that they are going to be given grades on the work that they've been doing over this disrupted time in a system that was not set up to assess them in that way. Okay. Now, the likelihood is that those grades will be slightly higher than normal, but at the moment, we don't know anything about any moderation process. Grades last year were about, A-level grades were about half a grade higher nationally than you might expect in a given year. This year, we don't know what that grade profile is going to look like, because once you've done that process once and we know it didn't work, how are they going to put that genie back in the bottle this year? Okay, that's where I'm going to leave it. Thanks, Gareth. Sorry to go on about too much technical stuff.
No, really useful insight, Steve. Thank you. And if anyone's got any sort of specific questions for Steve, feel free to drop them into the chat box. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to answer them. But I do now want to move on to, so we've heard a little bit from sort of the, I guess, educational side of things, but I want to think about now the impact we're already seeing amongst employers. So we've put together a small panel of hopefully good stakeholders that can help us out with that. So if I can just initially ask our three panelists to just introduce themselves, perhaps starting with you, Emma.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Emma Wood. I'm a talent acquisition partner at AstraZeneca, and I'm responsible for the recruitment of our UK apprenticeship programmes every year.
Fantastic, thank you, Emma. And maybe Alex?
Oh, shall I go then?
Yeah.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Alex Hawchen. I'm a policy advisor in education skills at the CBI, particularly focusing on school policy and youth employability.
Fantastic, thank you, Alex. And Tracy?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Gregg. I work in the Employment and Skills Service at Leeds City Council. I work with businesses around recruitment, particularly emphasis on apprenticeships. We have an apprenticeship hub, and I also work with our careers leaders and coordinators across the city in secondary schools, sixth form and FE colleges.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tracy. Now, I'm going to come to Emma first, actually, and I might just monopolise a bit of your time, Emma, to start with, because I believe you have an important appointment at 10 o'clock to get a certain jab.
Yes.
Can I assume it's the AstraZeneca jab?
Well, I hope so. I'll be disappointed if it isn't.
Would you refuse any other brand?
I think I would have to.
But I mean, you know, because obviously you're involved in recruitment across the board, and I'm just interested in your perspective. I mean, particularly with, I guess, recent recruits that have already come into the workplace, are you seeing any, you know, skills deficits already emerging amongst kind of school and college leavers?
Yeah, we're not actually. Which, when I was thinking about the questions that you posed, I was thinking about, well, have we? But I don't believe that we have. I guess this time last year we were all really anxious about what was going to happen in terms of assessment days and how we would recruit the apprentices. And actually it turned out really well. And, you know, from a virtual perspective, we got some great feedback about our events. So I guess our concern was at the time, and still is, about those particular new starters, is that some of them have yet to be in the workplace. They're all working at home virtually, and you know, we've sort of pulled out all the stops in terms of making sure that they've got that additional support to make them feel like they're part of the team, even when they're, you know, working at home on their own. And I'm not hearing anything from my colleagues to say, you know, we've had any real huge issues with any candidate in particular that I could reflect on. I think what I'm thinking about is for this year, and as both Steve and Anne have said, I think we won't see the full impact for a couple of years yet. I don't even think we're going to see the impact this year. I think perhaps next year or the year after, when students have, you know, really been missed lots of education because of the 2 lockdowns and possibly 3 in some instances. I don't think we'll see it yet anyway, but I'm prepared to see it if that happens, but I'm not expecting to see a huge difference.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose the intakes and the recruits that have already joined, they were probably only really affected by perhaps 3 or 4 months of disruption at the tail end of, I guess, a final year of education. In fact, as Steve's already said, they were probably already quite institutionalized, kind of knew what they were aiming for and achieving, I guess. So do you think the loss of having that I think was the description, a terminal exam that Anne used. You know, that focus towards working towards a particular exam where you get to show what you're capable of, you get that recognition of having achieved something. Is the fact that that disappeared, you're not thinking that that's going to cause any development issues?
Yeah, I do actually, but from more of a mental health perspective, really. And you know, candidates I spoke to last year, and my own niece who's 17, so first year of A levels, has sort of said, what was all my schoolwork for? Because I've done no exams, I've got nothing to show for what I've done, what I've achieved. And so she almost felt, and she wasn't alone with the people that I've spoken to, almost like that was a little bit of a waste. And it's trying to make them realise that actually it wasn't, but because there's such a huge emphasis on those exams and the results of those, that it's you know, it's not surprising that that's how they feel that, well, what was the last 5 years for? You know, I was told, you know, you've got to study, you've got to do these exams, you've got to be brilliant at them, and then actually there's no exams at all. So I am nervous about what's going to happen with results this year. We make conditional offers in May to A-level students, you know, that haven't got their results until sort of August, and which is the same every year. And I am worried about what those results are going to look like, you know, based on the fiasco of last year, and you know, having to deal with quite a few students upset, and parents actually that phoned in the end and sort of said, you know, I've got a, you know, a 18-year-old here that's absolutely devastated, doesn't know if they're going to have their apprenticeship offer guaranteed now. So I am anxious about what's going to happen in August, but I'm sure we'll get through it somehow.
Fantastic. And in terms of the recruitment processes that you're going through at the moment, which I know includes some finance entry-level apprentices, but will encompass a lot of other functions in the business. I mean, in terms of when you see CVs or when you're looking towards interviews and assessment centres for candidates, are you starting to get any sense that there's going to be differences on that front with this next generation of recruits who are going to have had a few more months of impact of this compared to those that have already joined the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, we're right in the middle of our application window at the moment, so we've got another 4 weeks of time for candidates to apply. So I've not actually looked at many CVs or hardly any actually. What I have seen is a huge rise in application numbers. So we're double total application numbers already than we were like this time last year, and that's not to be, we were expecting to see higher application numbers, but in terms of the quality, or you know, where perhaps there are lacking skills, I couldn't say because I've not looked at the CVs. I think we'll see a definite lack in work experience, whether that's a part-time job or something else. But I think what we'll be looking for is where they've perhaps done something else instead, and where they're able to articulate that. So perhaps some volunteering work. There are lots of volunteer programs happening, the community responder program, the vaccine, and I was trying to think of the name of the they're like stewards, aren't they? Vaccine steward program. You know, just helping a local neighbour, you know, an elderly neighbour or relative, and where they've used different skills for those types of things. They've thought a bit outside the box, and I don't like that term, but that's what I'm trying to say. You know, where they've thought, well, I can't show my work experience, but I can show this instead, and just having that sort of, them having that perception of that might be a good piece of evidence to provide.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to Anne's idea, and I love that idea of scaffolding, you know, helping create scaffolding for these young adults to show the best of what they have done, even if it's, you know, a few years earlier than we would normally expect people to be reaching back to. So, no, fantastic. That's really useful insight, Emma. I know you do have to dash off fairly shortly, but feel free to hang on as long as you can and contribute. And actually, we are planning to follow up this session in about 2 or 3 months, looking at onboarding this COVID generation, because I suspect we are going to need to put more support in place, both employers and training providers, to actually ease the transition of these young adults into the workplace. So perhaps we'll return and see what the experience is like once you're a bit further through the recruitment process. But I might now turn to Tracy and Alex, just going back to that point around if the employers you're talking to, are any of them seeing with recruits who've already come into the workplace that have experienced sort of educational disruption, are there any impacts on the skills they're seeing? I don't know, Tracy, if you've got any views on this.
Yeah, sure. We have an apprenticeship hub as part of our service, and we ran an apprenticeship festival last week. So it was a week-long festival in Leeds. We normally do a face-to-face event, which has about 6,500 people. This year we did a virtual festival for a week, and we had 62,000 hits to the site, and we had, you know, a range of one-to-one and careers advice. And it's still terrifying, the lack of information around apprenticeships and what apprenticeships are. And my son's a teacher, so I'm not having a go at teachers. My son's a teacher, but we often will hear schools say, oh, absolutely, we'll send a few kids who might want to be interested in an apprenticeship, as opposed to actually, let's just share all of this rich information so young people can make an informed choice post 16 and post 18. And for me, working with businesses, particularly SMEs struggled with, when we went from A to C for GCSEs, and then we went from 9 to 1, obviously thinking 1 must be top and having to go through them. SMEs just want to know, and I understand that we don't, you know, exams aren't everything, and I get that, you know, as I say, I have a son who's a teacher, but some SMEs just want to know they can compare like for like, and comparing like for like is able to say what young people got grades at GCSEs. So that's, I think, for some SMEs. For some bigger organisations, a lot more enlightened around particular skills. We have, as part of our careers options in the city, something called Start, and Start is a national platform, but we developed Start in Leeds, which is a local online careers guidance platform. And we've enabled young people to be able to do digital CVs, create a digital CV or a digital portfolio. So when they leave schools, rather than, you know, just their exams or whatever that we're going to have this time, it's around, you know, were you in the football team? What examples of world of work? We've done lots of virtual work experience with a lot of businesses in the city. I work with businesses, contractors, developers who've got employment skills obligations, either as a result of a Section 106 under planning or through delivering council contracts, and not as many apprentices and jobs going on. There's a number of vacancies, but the starts are about 20% down in Leeds than they were this time last year. So what they've said is we're more than happy to do some virtual experience. So that's virtual work experience, interview skills, employability skills. We've had some fascinating example online interviews have been amazing. I mean, bonkers and scary to start with, but amazing when we've got into it. So we've done a lot of virtual activities so that young people can build up this digital portfolio of, and you know, we talked before around enrichment activities. Young people will be involved in sports and youth clubs and guides and whatever it was, and that's not happening now. So what else have you done? You know, have you taken part in any of the free online arts and culture activities? Something that you can put in your CV or on your digital portfolio that are things other than your academic experience. So that's what we're trying to do in the city. And I would say one of the skills that young people seem to be lacking at the moment, and a lot of adults, is around resilience and confidence. And I think resilience and confidence is something which will make itself known. Lack of resilience and lack of confidence, I think, over the next few months.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Trace. And that's, you know, why I think employers really need to be able to actually support young adults through the recruitment process, probably more than they would normally expect to. And as Anne said, it's not about dumbing down, it's just about giving them the opportunities to actually explore the transferable skills they have developed. Alex, have you got any thoughts from the CBI's perspective with employers you talk to?
Yeah, I'd echo what Emma said, actually, in that we haven't had feedback from members that the young people they've recruited so far have displayed any particular skills deficits that are causing issues for their businesses. So that's, you know, positive from our perspective. In many ways, I think we haven't seen like the full impact. It's, you know, it's the school leavers of this year, of next year, who will have had much more heavily disrupted learning. So that's the cohort that we are sort of more particularly concerned about. And the focus of our concern is really around, for want of a better phrase, soft skills. Now, we consistently hear from our members that skills like resilience, communication, teamwork, leadership, etc., are what they really look for, in some cases more than grades. So it's the loss of this, you know, as we've mentioned before, the socializing aspect of school, the loss of those formative early work experiences that we've already discussed, that you know, we're particularly keen to keep an eye on, more so than the sort of subject specific knowledge that they may have missed from their schooling. I'm particularly concerned about students who leave school this year and don't go into higher education or further education, because they will be both beyond the in-school mechanisms that the government are mooting to tackle lost learning, and they won't be in structured sort of further learning, which will be, you know, best placed to compensate. So I'd say that's sort of our positioning at the moment in terms of particularly concern around soft skills and yeah, those students who aren't going into more sort of formalized learning.
Fantastic, thanks, Alex. And actually, we're hearing a clear message, I think, you know, from Steve himself through to this, that perhaps it's not the academic educational side of things that's going to be the issue. You know, I see, you know, my own eldest, she's not quite at GCSE level, but she has knuckled down, and she's actually had really great grades recently, because she, that thing around not being distracted by the teacher, I think is kind of quite true, actually, Steve, that she is able to just crack on with her work and do it at her own pace. But actually, perhaps it's these rounder and again soft skills, and you know, we'll have a discussion about what we really should call soft skills, because I think it's you know, it reduces the sort of perceived importance of what are the critical career skills, I think, around you know, communication, teamwork, even just that confidence piece. Do you have any sort of final advice for employers that are going through their recruitment process at the moment in terms of what allowances perhaps they can make, Alex?
Yeah, I think a key thing will be that no two young people will have had their learning disrupted in the same way. So there's going to be some need for a tailored approach to the support that's being provided. We're hearing great examples of work that members are doing, you know, in order to try and compensate for this, whether it's, you know, in companies who have had to defer apprenticeships but are organising online pre-apprenticeship support programs just to keep those young people active. So support in that way, or once they're onboarded. And we're hearing, for example, JP Morgan doing a lot of work around sort of mentorship, peer support, being very conscious of the need for really intense mental health support, particularly, and also engagement with government programs. As you mentioned earlier, Gareth, there are incentives around apprenticeships. The Kickstart program is particularly interesting for the support that it provides for employability skills. So I think sort of engagement with various government programs that specifically include training and learning on the job could be sort of quite a powerful way to tackle some of the issues we're seeing.
So thank you, Alex. And actually, Tracy, do you have any sort of final advice for employers around the current recruitment or even upcoming? I mean, it sounds like we may even see bigger issues potentially next year and the following year, let alone in what we're seeing in recruitment this year.
Well, I think, again, employers involved in virtual interviews and interview prep and practice is great, because I think actually we've learned a lot from interview prep and practice online, and that's great. And I think if employers get involved in that, they'll understand more. It's much better for employers to do it than some old middle-aged woman from the council who tells young people what they should be doing. But actually, if businesses get involved, they really listen to that around things like brand as well, and brand identity. We've had some businesses speaking to our young people to say, you know, that email address you've got is awful, how you present yourselves. And I think that interview prep from businesses is really, really vital and really useful.
Fantastic, thank you, Tracy. And I know we ordinarily do various academies and summer schools around the country focused at GCSE A-level young adults who are potentially exploring finance and accountancy as career routes, and obviously they've not been possible for a year now. So we did some virtual stuff last year, which was hugely successful. We had about 800 registrations on our kind of virtual summer school program. We're doing some academies coming up, and a lot of that is actually around not just the technical side of what are the different awarding bodies and what are the different skills in accountancy. A lot of it is around the transferable skills that are actually really in demand in finance. But we also talk a bit about writing CVs and interview prep. And in fact, Ben, my colleague, I know you're involved in producing that idea of where intakes are being delayed slightly, having something to keep them going. I know we produced a bunch of what we call pre-start resources that our clients were able to use with the young adults to build some basic, I think even basic kind of, literacy in the workplace, numeracy in the workplace, communication, team working are skills that actually we're going to need to probably support young adults with. So fantastic. So thank you very much to Alex and Tracy, and to Emma, who I know has now had to drop off to go and get jabbed. Great insight there. So as we normally do with these, I want to now sort of finish off by giving although this hasn't really specifically been about accountancy, I'm always interested to hear insight from the awarding bodies that we do work with. So I'm wondering if I can call on, I know we've got Sophie from the AAT, I think, head of HR at the AAT. I wonder if you've got any observations on what we've talked about or contributions that you can give that employers might find useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Gareth says, I'm the head of HR at AAT. So we're a relatively small employer, sort of 220 employees, and recruitment has certainly been lower for us over the last year, but we are having to look at how we adapt that. So, you know, often we've been heavily focused on things like competency-based interviews, where we are looking at recruiting for those entry-level roles. It's also adding in those potential questions as well, and thinking about, well, what are the different skills we're going to need? So looking at resilience has come up a few times today, but also, is somebody able, are they a self-starter? Can they sit in a room on their own without that interaction with people all day long and get done what they need to do? And is it actually, okay, so they may have those gaps in their CVs, so they might not be able to tell us an example of when they've done great customer service, but can we give them a test and actually say to them, you know, have they got the right kind of tone? Can they pick up on the right kind of things rather than tell us what they've done in the past? So we're sort of looking really at adapting how we are assessing it. And I think we also have to think about when we bring people in. Some people have never worked in an office, have not stepped in an office. So we have a fantastic office in the Barbican. And when you go in there, you get an idea of the feel and the culture of the organisation, you know, just by walking through the doors. But where we've had new starters, there's simple things like issues around, well, turning up on time, because there's not a, you know, you're not walking into an office late where everybody's looking at you going, oh, hold on a minute, it's 9:10 and everybody's sat down working. So then there's sort of a bit of work around that sort of buddying scheme and how, you know, it's those employability skills, but also those skills around just knowing what a professional environment is like. If you've been in a college environment or a school environment, how do you adapt to sort of coming in? So that's something we're sort of having to think about in terms of having the more informal buddy side of things, as well as your line manager and your peer-to-peer inductions and such like. Yeah, I think it's just being a bit broad with it, being prepared, you know, being prepared for those gaps in the CVs. And certainly we've seen that in our applications. We are getting more applications, and we're getting applications from people who have been out of work or have a gap. And it's recognising why that's there and looking for that potential. So I think that's, yeah, like a sort of key experience.
Fantastic, thank you, Sophie. And actually, that's a very valid point about having gaps. I mean, I know from feedback that some employers I talk to, their current recruitment round, they're seeing candidates who arguably should have applied a year ago, but have been in a bit of a limbo and I guess didn't get around to applying at that sort of point, and actually understanding that perhaps some, you know, because that's the first thing you'd look at on a CV is finding out why is there that gap, what happened, what's gone wrong, what's the issue. Whereas actually now it's actually probably quite understandable. Thank you very much, Sophie. So from the ICAEW, I don't know, Fiona, do you want to chip in?
Sorry, Gareth, it's going to be Lucy from us this week.
Oh, is it? Thank you very much. Lucy, hi, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, is it? I didn't realise it was going to be me, but good morning, everybody. It's been really interesting following the discussion, especially in the chat as well. And I would say that one of the things that I think we contribute from here is with those gaps that you've mentioned, but also how you question those students on what they've been doing during this period. There seems to be a trend to say, well, what have you achieved during lockdown or during the pandemic? And it's being mindful, I think, of those students that have just survived through it, that not everyone is going to have picked up new skills or done extra development. And we've talked a lot about the mental health issues as well. So I think it's with your kind of unconscious bias, your sort of judgment in that recruitment process of being mindful that for some, just surviving has been enough. I would echo some of the points as well of those discussion points of who they are and what makes them tick is much more important. but I'm sure some of my other colleagues will have some contributions to make as well.
I think that, I mean, that actually, I hadn't even thought about that point that was raised earlier about getting to understand who you are and what makes you tick. You know, even silly stuff like that paper round I had when I was a kid. I used to deliver 180 papers on a round. It was like one of these free rags that you get shoved through your letterbox, and it taught me so much about, you know, work ethic and timekeeping. And you know, I did that little thing where I had 180 papers to deliver, so I'd break it down and think, well, 18 is 10%, 36 is 20%, and I'd work my way through. A technique I still use when I'm on my rowing machine. If I'm doing a 40-minute row and I'm breaking it down by percentages, a little bit of nice mental arithmetic, but it's all about kind of goal setting and hitting targets and thinking, right, I'm 50% through, okay, it's on the back half of the, you know, the row or whatever. And I guess a lot of those sorts of basic life skills that we all use from day to day are just going to be a little bit blurred at the moment, a little bit vaguer for students. So thank you very much, Lucy. Really thanks for your contribution. So I don't know whether, do we have Gemma from the ACCA? I don't know if Clive is with us.
It's Alex, actually. Sorry.
Oh, Alex. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, everyone, and well, thanks for inviting us to participate. Well, it was really a very interesting discussion, and just from our perspective, I wanted to add that we actually run quite a big global survey, just asking the Gen Z and those who are about to enter into the accountancy profession. And we're going to release a report in the beginning of April, just summarizing the findings of those who are about to join the workforce, and also the discussions that we have with the employers in the accountancy field. And so there are some really very interesting findings there. And well, if you have a chance to take a look at our Professional Insights page in the beginning of April, we're releasing the report on the 13th. You'll find some interesting facts there. And just like from my perspective, and what we keep hearing is that it's the interesting dynamic on how those generations and those who've been learning digitally for this year, they are actually approaching the entire process of learning and what it means for the future employment and how their training needs to be approached. One of the observations that we hear quite often is that those generations, those groups are quite often jumping to the technology solution. And that's a great benefit that they're so literate about the digital solutions, about social media, but sometimes they tend to go and jump to the technology solution without going the hard yards of the accountancy training, for example. And well, the employers will really need to reflect on how to address this and how to rethink the approach to training. And we find that this intergenerational training, intergenerational coaching and mentoring is very important there, while there is so much to share between different age groups. And this is definitely becoming quite an important trend. And in particular, so in the small business sector, in the accountancy. And so there are also, of course, one of the other important findings of our report, and something that was mentioned by many speakers today, is that mental health and well-being is a very central concern for those who are about to enter the workforce. And looking at the employers, those generations are also looking at what the employers have to offer in this area. And despite all the financial concerns, again, seeing the impact of the COVID and seeing the impact of the pandemic in general and how it shaped the perception of work, the purpose of work is very important. And despite all the pragmatic considerations, still seeing how the employers are caring about their employees, how they're communicating the value and the purpose of the work and the mission of their organization is very important for those generations, despite all the disruption and the impact of the pandemic that we're seeing. So I think that's it. And I will post the link to our Professional Insights website, and we'll have many interesting details in the report that we're going to launch on the 13th of April. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alex from the ACCA. And actually, yeah, that report actually into Gen Z. I'm very much looking forward to that, and when that does come out, perhaps we can even link it to the debrief of this. I think it's been very very relevant. In fact, I'm getting the impression this is a discussion that's only just starting, so I suspect this might be a topic that we return to in, or even over the next couple of years, perhaps to see how things are evolving. So and maybe CIMA, Trevor, if you've got any sort of final thoughts as we tail off.
Definitely. First of all, thank you to your panel. Some fascinating insights. One that caught my ear was really, don't catastrophize the situation. I think that is spot on. The bridge might have collapsed, but we still got to cross the river. And certainly what we saw from our perspective, and I'm talking from an employer point of view and a employer relations and student rather than HR point of view, is that we found our students to be actually pretty resilient. They had to face clearly some pretty big changes. Most have done that very, very well. They've adapted quickly to the new norm. As you're aware, we put our exams online pretty sharpishly after the pandemic struck. And although we saw a small downturn, I guess, in people taking up exams, that soon picked up. And what we really found was that the recovery was quite spectacular. Pass rates were pretty much identical to what we saw in normal times. So yeah, I mean, some big changes have happened, but life and business has to go on, and I'm sure we'll do that moving forward when people find a way.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Trevor. So I don't know if anybody has any final comments, observations, anything that they've really resonated with this morning that they are happy to unmute themselves and chip in. I might even call on Ben, my colleague, just if there's anything that's really jumped out of you that we as a training provider perhaps need to consider in the coming months or even the next couple of years.
Really good speakers today and some really insightful stuff. I think the one thing that jumped out of me, and there was lots of things today that was worth noting down and thinking about, was Anne talking about mentors. And I know that's something that some of our larger employers have done for a number of years now, and we really do see the benefits. And stressed it not just for the new starters, but also for the people that are given the responsibility to mentor. That aligns very nicely with the higher level skills that those guys need to take the step up from student to almost a lower level management position. It aligns brilliantly with the apprenticeship standards at the level 7 stuff that we provide. And I would encourage employers to look at that. One thing that's kind of sparked my interest, Gareth, and this is one to take back to FI, if you're sitting there as a smaller employer, and I appreciate not every employer we train for have got this wealth of 3 or 4 levels of student to kind of give the mentoring responsibilities to, it might be something we could work to connect up some other students to do some mentoring for somebody else. Encourage your students to make contact with us there, and we will do our best to find candidates maybe to hook them up. It's something we can certainly take back to our management meetings, Gareth, I think.
Yeah, very good point. And you know, my experience is that the mentoring process can be almost as valuable for the mentor as it is for the mentee. You know, particularly I hear a lot increasingly around sort of reverse mentoring or upward mentoring, particularly when you've got young adults coming into the workplace who perhaps are, you know, more familiar with technology and other skills that they will have had to have developed in the last year that actually can bring a real value to the workplace. Well, I want to thank our speakers. That's been really fascinating. So thanks to Anne, thanks to Steve for their initial perspectives kind of from an educational side of things, and then Alex, Tracy and Emma, thank you for your input on our little panel discussion, and then the awarding bodies, as ever, you know, grateful, you know, for the support you always give to our forums and the insight that you bring. So thanks to Lucy, to Sophie, Trevor and Alex for their contribution there. Just so that everybody is aware, I'll just share some upcoming events that we've got which may be of interest. So actually on Monday, if any of you have particularly ICAEW students, you're probably aware that they are now introducing data analytics software, a program called Inflow, into the ICAEW exams. Going to be examined in the first time in March of this year, so looming. So some of your students will already be getting to grips with Inflow. We're doing an employer session actually on Monday coming at lunchtime to take partners, managers, HR leads through what exactly their students are going to be seeing. I imagine there may be some awkward situations of students coming back to the workplace talking about this WYSI software that they're being taught about, and perhaps their seniors not having any idea what they're talking about. So please feel free to let people know about that. We're then doing another forum next month, same style as this one, looking specifically at the broader impact that data analytics are having in the accountancy sector and on finance. I think it's clear that data analytics is now washing over the industry at a rapid pace. So we're going to have a few speakers from different areas to talk about the impact that that's having. And then just to follow on, I can see I've misspelled COVID. You'd think I'd be able to spell it by now. But we're going to follow up this session, as I've said, in May. Still need to nail the date down, but actually looking at, we've talked a bit about recruiting the COVID generation. We're going to look at the actual process of onboarding them and what kind of support it's likely that employers might need to offer, the kind of support that training providers will be looking to offer. But I think this is a discussion we'll probably be looking to return to as the months pass. But thank you again to our speakers. Thank you so much to everyone for attending. Lots and lots of contribution in the chat box, which we will gather. We will circulate both the recording of this session, but also a bit of an overview of some of the discussion that we've had, some of the key points, and we'll try and capture what was in the chat box to bring in. But apart from that, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sure we will cross paths in the not too distant future. So enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you all very, very soon.